Hello, I'm Ella Sillywood. In today's Insight, supported by Rolex, we're exploring an upcoming double bill, Kurt Weill's The Seven Deadly Sins and Mahagonny Songspiel. These are two radical works by two radical theatre makers, Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht. They left audiences asking questions like, what is theatre? What is opera? These are questions you'll be able to ask too, because the production will be streamed live on Friday the 9th of April. So do check out the Royal Opera House website to find out more. For now, we're going to start things off by sneaking into a live rehearsal. And for that, I'm going to hand things over to Director Isabelle Kettle to introduce us to the cast and creatives.
Thank you. Hi everyone, it's really nice to have you here to watch our live rehearsal. First of all, I'd just like to introduce the creative team that we'll be working with in rehearsal today, which is the same people we're working with every day. Julia, the choreographer, Michael, who is the répétiteur, and other Michael, who is the conductor, Thomasin, who is our dance artist and collaborator, Jonadette, who is playing the role of Anna 2, and Steph, who is playing the role of Anna 1. So today we're going to be rehearsing one of the scenes, which is lust, and it happens quite late on in the production. So I think without further ado, we'll just launch straight in. So Steph and Jonadette, shall we just? What I thought we'd do is just start with the first section, but we won't really rehearse it very much, but we can use it just to lead us into the section I'd really like to look at, which is partly just thinking about the moment, Jonadette, where you break away, because, you know, we've been playing a lot with the kind of mirroring idea and the ways in which you are both sort of other halves of the same self, but this feels like a really key moment in the production where you're actually choosing to break away from the thing that Anna 1 is forcing you to do, which is to have relationships with men you don't want, and you get pulled into this feeling of real love, which of course in this world of double standards is labelled lust. But so then we can really see that change in you and the moment you break away, and then finding what the freedom is and the joy and the movement quality, but also how that impacts you as you're watching her when you're trying to control her behaviours, and what happens to you when you, and it feels like a turning point for you, Steph, as well, where you suddenly feel that actually maybe love is what you want, and maybe you shouldn't have been policing all of these desires up to this point. Mm-hmm. So shall we just go let's take it from the top of lust. Mm-hmm. So this is where we'll mirror the poses. Do you both feel comfortable with the mirrored poses? Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's just take it in and see how we go. Lovely. Great.
Should we go from the end of Gluttony?
Let's take it just from the end of Gluttony. So just into lust. So you'll get out the laptop and open it, ready to pose for Edward on the internet. Okay, great.
Und auch aus Liebe
just going to hold you there, and before we get into we'll have a little look at the dance section. I just want to work on just a tiny bit there. I think just in getting the transition into this really beautiful loving space from this really horrible, dirty world where you have to pose for this guy. And I'm just wondering whether, first of all, Steph, I think there's more to give in the laptop shutting.
Yeah.
But also whether there's just something about when you're watching Jonadette shift and be pulled away from that world. And I think Jonadette, you can clock it. You can actually, it's like you're consciously making the choice and saying to your other self, I don't want this, I want this other man, I want love, so that you're actually finding a moment where you connect, you pull away, so that slow turn is really, first of all, a conscious interaction, pulling away and just feeling the total transformation, I think, with this, when the music shifts into this da 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 da. So that it just feels like we really want to kind of shift energies. And I think for you, Steph, also, and this is something we've talked about a lot, is this kind of Anna 1 being so kind of changeable all the time, and that's where the interest lies. And I wonder whether that's beautiful what you're doing with the Ich hatte meine Not mit Anna, that you're like telling her off, but then as she resists and as you see her go into this world of love, that there's something so heartbreaking for you about that, and you know you really want that too, because of course after all you're the same person.
Yeah.
So I think just finding that transition, I think. And Thomasin, I'm just wondering about, it's just a small thing, and I don't know, like just the quality of the walk in, just of like that there's something, especially because we've seen you be all these other men in the show who are so horrible, that actually what the quality is of just, and in a way you've been putting what you want onto Anna in the past scenes, in the past men we've seen, but somehow here you're actually just an open space ready for her to kind of reach for. So just something about that quality.
Yeah, I think also like just it's kind of honest and relaxed, and the first time we see you being yourself, first time we see you being really what yourself is, and what that intention of joy and playfulness and kind of lightness. That's it, that bit.
Yeah.
I think.
Do you have something?
Come on, actually, because there's quite a few little musical cues that might be helpful. Which bit are we thinking?
Yes, so I think the best play is for him to come on when Steph says den bezahlte sie, and then we have this like that really nice pause before und auch aus Liebe.
So when she sings und den bezahlte sie, that's the first little shift of the character of the music at this point. Previously it's this little sort of repeated, oscillated phrase. It's really sort of restless, and we've got this staccato in the bass instruments, dum 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 dum, and then suddenly this sort of gorgeous legato phrase, und den bezahlte sie, and then these extraordinary 2 bars where the orchestra just drop out completely, and she says und auch aus Liebe, and also out of love, and then we're mirrored in the orchestra. It just sounds, that bar just sounds like this, 1, and then the guitar comes in, and then suddenly it's this new character completely, and these really evocative strings.
Yeah.
So that phrase really from Steph begins the transition.
Yeah. So I wonder if there's real something to be had, because it's unaccompanied, right? That auch aus Liebe, something just in the total still. If you walked out just before, but then the real, just the contact of you two and the contact of you looking at Jonadette.
Yeah.
There's something really powerful in the stillness, probably.
Yeah.
Also, something you said about the restless strings made me think that there's probably more to be had in our mirroring here. And I don't think we'll go back to it. I'm just thinking whether, as you're being forced to mirror her at the beginning, but we see that it's more painful. You don't want to be doing it. It's not just easy at this point. So that in all those poses you're copying, you're resisting it, so then it makes sense of when you break away, that's what you've been wanting to do all the way through.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Should we just try it from maybe Und wir fanden einen Mann? So that's the last, where the phrase where Steph slides her leg out towards the laptop.
Yeah. So you can add a bit more resistance.
So yeah, I
there
think you
that.
could,
Just,
yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it can change speed a bit, like you go in there and then
Yeah.
you know, just to change up a bit. Sometimes following, then just playing with resistance a little bit and timing.
Yeah, I even wonder whether you could maybe the leg is the sort of impetus for you to break out of the mirroring, turn to Steph, you know, something like, yeah, or, yes, exactly
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
something
yeah.
where you're just like, no, I don't want to do this, and then Steph suddenly realizes, and that's why Steph turns. Yeah, cool.
Yeah, just going into that, there's this sort of apocalyptic build-up in the orchestra, and then the bar that Steph starts singing, it sort of builds and builds, and then we get a kind of bang in the brass, a kind of sfortissimo chord. And I wonder if that sort of sparks something before we just
Where
this.
is that
So this
chord?
happens the bar after one. If we just play it for you. So
Oh yeah, that's perfect.
the
Yeah.
bar before one is, and it builds here, and then
That one.
that one there,
Yeah. So that could be your breakaway, Jonadette. Should we just hear it again and go into it and then keep going?
Do you want a little bit more in? Maybe just 2 bars before one,
yeah.
so we get the melody and the trumpet. 2 bars before one is.
That's the breakaway. Yeah.
Und wir fanden einen Mann in Boston,
Yeah, nice, Jonadette.
der bezahlte gut und zwar aus Liebe. Und ich hatte meine Not mit Anna, denn auch sie liebte aber
Yeah, nice,
einen
Steph.
anderen.
And here's the chain.
Den bezahlte sie. Und auch aus Liebe. Ach, ich sagte ihr oft ohne Treue, bist du höchstens die Hälfte wert. Man bezahlt nicht für solche Säue, sondern nur für das, was man fährt. Das kann höchstens einer machen, die auf niemand angewiesen ist.
Yeah. Playful.
Einander hat nichts zu lachen, wenn sie einmal ihre Situation vergisst. Er sagte,
Wait, let's hold
setz
there.
dich nicht
Thanks.
zwischen zwei.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about that. It feels to me like what's really beautiful about that at the moment, it feels like it's sort of really crescendoing into something like deeper joy. But I also wonder, I mean, it may be partly working with masks that it's harder to you know, read the expression, but actually there's something about the very first gesture that Jonadette does. I think we want to really feel and know exactly what that world we're in, that this is a totally different world and the only time we're ever going to be in this world. And it's this is, I think, our moment of true
Yeah.
feeling which isn't suppressed, and that's the tragedy of what happens afterwards when it does get suppressed.
Can I just hear that music, the bit before, when it goes dark, dun, dun, and then it goes dun, 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 dun.
Lovely,
dun,
yeah,
dun,
so
dun, dun.
we'll just go from Und auch aus Liebe.
I wonder if it's when you come through. Sorry.
So we'll just play.
Und auch aus Liebe.
Just clocking first.
Ach, ich
Breath, maybe?
sagte
There
dir
we go.
oft ohne Treue, bist du
Just taking her away with it.
Hilfe
Yeah.
wert.
It's just, thanks. Thank you.
Man bezahlt nicht.
I think it's just just registering that moment of connection first, and then a bit of letting go to in the body, because you're masking so much in the whole show, in the whole piece, that this is the moment where you get to just like let go of it all. So whatever that is for you, just to kind of, and then kind of let yourself get dragged away into the feeling that you're getting from the connection with Thomasin. That you can just be yourself, and you don't need to have this line, you can just move freely as you would do if you were like just I don't know, a jam that is like your favourite track and you're like, whoa, that sort of feeling. And I think smiling, playing, bringing out each other's joy in that kind of spontaneous, sort of fun thing that we did in that first week of rehearsals. Just play on that connection together.
I think there's just one thing to add, Thomasin. I'm just wondering whether with the first offering Jonadette makes, it's something about, you know, like when you fall in love and you suddenly, like everything that person does just seems glorious in those, you know, so I'm just wondering if it's that's the first thing that Jonadette, so that's what inspires you to respond and, you know, yeah.
Yeah, like you find it captivating.
And I just have one thing for you, Steph. That Zoya, you're being so horrible about her. You're saying, you know, he doesn't care for sort of that swine, right? And I think, but I wonder whether the how horrible you're being is actually coming from how much it's hurting you. So you're not just, you know, it's not just being easy horrible. It's like that as you're saying it, it's so painful that you have to be telling yourself that you're a swine, even as you're feeling the beauty of love. Cool. Should we give that another go from just the lead in Den bezahlte sie, or maybe...
Yeah, we can go straight on that if you want.
Yeah, so this is just the shift.
Und in,
Got 5.
Ach, ich sagte ihr oft, ohne Treue, bist du höchstlich die Hälfte wert. Man bezahlt nicht für solche Säue, sondern nur für das, was man verehrt. Das kann höchstens sein. Die auf niemand angewiesen ist. Ein anderer hat nichts zu danken, wenn sie einmal ihre Situation vergisst. Ihr sagte ich, setz dich
Right,
nicht
let's
zwischen
hold there.
zwei Stühle.
Yeah, that's that quality of the jaw, it was really beautiful, Thomasin. Yeah, yeah. I'm wondering also, Steph, something I've been talking to Steph a bit about is just like as she's watching this, that we're not mirroring exactly, but it's almost like she's living this too. So that somehow just small fragments of that are being picked up.
Yeah, yeah. In repeating that motif that Jonadette's doing.
Yes, yes, something like that.
What are you doing on this side here when you're?
See, at the moment you're just watching, right? And
Well, I'm watching them, and what I'm saying is really
horrible. Yeah, yes.
I'm like who can, like, no, basically no one's ever going to love you if you cheat on them. You can't cheat on someone.
And you're saying like you can only be with men who pay.
Yeah.
Because you can't afford to really love. So it's so horrible what you're saying. Yeah.
But obviously at the same time it's like that. She's watching Anna too be completely free and in love.
Yeah.
And that's what she really wants.
Yeah,
but it's that kind of it's like when your best friend's happy and obviously like you
and you've just gone through a breakup.
yeah, and you're like, you remember that time that he didn't reply to you straight away?
Yeah,
it's like that.
Yeah.
So in that part, are you singing to the mirror? Can you see through that?
At this point she can see through the glass.
Then I think it's like that kind of intensity, but then I think maybe it's a glances over to soften up the gaze even. I don't think too much movement is needed here. It's quite like natural.
Because I've kind of been on my knees and it's kind of like slightly.
You kind of get immersed in it. You kind of get like oh wow, isn't that?
Yeah,
nice.
Yes.
It's just like,
it is so nice actually, just the idea, and that's something we've talked about design-wise, you know, thinking about as though she's just now left, she was looking at the mirror, but now she's looking through this glass screen as though this is just like a world, like the world on Instagram, that she just can't access somehow. Yeah, so maybe you're right, it can be kind of simple.
Yeah. Lean-ins and like softening of the face, but then I think it's just direction sometimes.
Yes, yeah. Should we just have a little look at the end, just into forget, you know, just the moment where you kind of almost at the height of your joy, then you get pulled out of it and you get pulled back by Steph's voice. So just finding that cue, vergisst, and suddenly she's there telling you, don't sit between two stools, you've got to choose. You can't have love, you've got to have the guy that will pay. So I think just finding that moment.
You track to get to here, don't you? And I think Thomasin goes around to go to the door. So maybe if it's just like something that separates you to move like that way. Yeah, there's like the sweepy bit on the floor going around. I guess wherever it takes you to. Yeah, I think keep that depth between you. So you use the space a bit more, like one's forward, one back, a bit more. The Thomasin go a bit more upstage. Yeah, so that.
Well, I suppose we could also play it also with, you know, since we're only seeing this on camera, you know, something about it, the depth being reading differently a little bit. You know, just trying to, feel that feeling of them being kind of their moment of greatest proximity.
And then there's kind of like a part of you, is that Thomasin, like when you leave her, that there's a slight pull because you want to be there, but then there's other Steph waiting for you here, which is, you know, maybe just a little something that's going on between you two here. Because I don't know if Jonadette realises that straight away he's gone. Or does she know
I don't think, she just gets pulled into hearing the voice in the mirror. Let's just have a tiny look at that and then I think we finish. So can we just hear the phrase that leads into vergisst, Steph's last phrase of that section, just so we get them used to that.
Should we go from eine andere hat nicht zu lachen?
So this is the last,
Just that bar is I.
Setz dich nicht zwischen zwei Stühle und dann besuchte ich ihn und sagte ihm, solche Gefühle sind für meine Schwester Anna der Ruin. Das kann höchstens einer machen, der auf niemand angewiesen ist. Ein anderer hat nicht zu lachen, wenn sie einmal ihre Situation vergisst.
Lovely. Yeah, that's really beautiful. Thank you guys. I think we have to finish there. Thank you.
Very nice, thank you.
I could not feel more like I'm intruding. It was so captivating. I had to be very loudly reminded that I was meant to be here to continue because I was just absolutely, you know, enraptured watching you all. I can't wait to see the real thing, but thank you for letting me sneak in and see you all. Well, as we reset, let's hear from Dramaturg Uzma Hameed on the creative team to tell us more about her role on the production.
I'm Uzma Hameed and I am the dramaturg on this production of The Seven Deadly Sins and the Mahagonny Songspiel by Brecht and Weill. As dramaturg, my role is to work with the director Isabelle on storytelling, helping to refine and interrogate the concept, develop the narrative journey, and also provide an outside eye when we are rehearsing. That's always the tricky bit, putting myself on the outside and having fresh eyes, having needed to be very much inside it to start with. What drew me to this production was firstly that these are both brilliant pieces. I've been fascinated by Brecht's work for many years. We think of him as this radical poet, playwright and agent provocateur who fiercely believed that theatre was not there to entertain but to educate. He's famous for Verfremdungseffekt, the idea of revealing the theatrical mechanics behind the play so that the audience is alienated from the action, jolted out of complacency and into a more detached, critical and questioning way of watching, which in turn, he thought, would pave the way for social change. Weill also, though perhaps less outwardly revolutionary than Brecht, was deeply egalitarian in his views on art and felt that music must be accessible to all, and moreover must speak to the daily concerns and lives of ordinary people. And this is where we get the interest for both artists in combining high and low forms, or at least what were traditionally thought of as high and low forms, whether that's the language of the Bible and the fairground in the case of Brecht, or jazz and popular music versus opera in the case of Weill. Weill also believed in the idea of Gebrauchsmusik, music that serves a socially useful purpose, so for example in the dance halls or in radio and film, the new mass media that also fascinated Brecht. Both artists were very much of their time and of the anti-establishment spirit that was prevalent in Germany after the First World War, the period we know as the Weimar Republic. After Germany's defeat and the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm, there was a feeling that the ruling elite had led the country into a disastrous war, followed by the seemingly endless and crushing burden of reparations, which again drove ordinary people to destitution and privation. In the move towards a real republican democracy, it was felt that the arts and humanities had a vital role because of their ability to educate people and therefore create citizens from those who up till now had only known how to be subjects. And if we think of this idea of institutions crumbling and the demand for underrepresented voices to be heard, hand in hand with economic devastation, you can see how these artists and their work also speaks to now and the sense of a society in a state of emergency, the state in which we find ourselves, which makes the work so ripe for reinterpretations like this production, which is another reason which drew me to it when I was asked to come on board. Brecht and Weill were also interested in the idea of America and the spirit of modernity and freshness that seemed to come from there, in contrast with the self-regarding classical culture of Europe. And in this, Brecht was fortunate to have as a close collaborator the writer Elisabeth Hauptmann. She had an American mother and as a fluent English speaker herself was able to make that world immediately available to Brecht. Seven Deadly Sins was created in 1933. By that time, both artists were in exile, having fled Germany when the Nazis came to power. In Paris, Weill secured a commission for a collaboration with the choreographer Georges Balanchine and invited Brecht to come on board. The piece, which they described as a ballet chanté, was to be both sung and danced, and conceived with two look-alike performers in mind, the singer Lotte Lenya, who was also Weill's wife, and the ballerina Tilly Loche. In the piece, a poor family from Louisiana send their daughter Anna away to seek her fortune as a dancer in the big city. The plan is that over 7 years, Anna will make enough money for the family to build a small house, at which point she will be able to return home. The part of Anna is played by both a singer and a dancer, who are often referred to as Anna 1 and Anna 2 respectively. When we first hear of them, they're described as sisters, and although Anna 1 then tells us that they're really one person, whether they're sibling rivals or aspects of self is a brilliant conceit that's endlessly rich and fascinating in the piece and never fully resolved. In Freudian psychoanalytical terms, Anna 1 could be seen as the controlling ego and Anna 2 as the unruly feeling id of a single person. On the other hand, when Anna 1 tells us that they are the same person and each only does what is good for the other, it sounds a little bit like the kind of co-opting that often goes on in families. As the two Annas go from city to city, Anna 2 is cured of the 7 deadly sins, with the help of the controlling Anna 1. The title is, of course, heavily ironic, because here the cardinal sins such as pride, lust, gluttony, and so on are either moral qualities or healthy physical impulses, righteous anger at injustice, for example, or the desire to eat. But they are also vices because they could prevent the Annas from achieving their goal of earning money. The role of the family in such a world is also suspect. They're the ones who send their daughter out into the world, sanctioning her exploitation and in fact exploiting her themselves. But once again, we're driven to ask if it's the system that's to blame, if the price of integrity is starvation. In the journey of the two Annas, there's also an echo of Brecht and Weill's own journey, cut off from their home and their brilliant careers, short of cash and having to start afresh in cities where they were far less well known. In the 7 deadly sins, although the lyrics tell us that the Annas return home, it's questionable whether home or they themselves are still intact by the end. In reality, the piece was a final parting of the ways for Brecht and Weill. Like the two Annas, they had never really got on as people despite the brilliance of their artistic collaborations. Brecht eventually returned to Germany, but a Germany that had been divided after the Second World War and unrecognisable as the country he had left. Weill, however, ultimately settled in the US and never did make it home. Putting these two productions together in a double bill is very interesting because in many ways they dialogue with each other. Both are set in America, both deal with the idea of cities as places of opportunity, but also of corruption, exploitation and vice. Both show the impossibility of individual morality in a society whose only currency is money. And they bookend the period of Brecht and Weill's collaborations. The Mahagonny Songspiel was their very first work together, and The Seven Deadly Sins was their last. The Mahagonny Songspiel, which was created in 1927, was originally taken from a collection of poems by Brecht, or as he called them, ballad texts, and set to music by Weill. There's no explicit plot, but the cycle functions like a concept album, in which songs are loosely threaded together to create the sense of a world, in this case Mahagonny. In the Mahagonny Songspiel, 4 men set off to a fictional American city, Mahagonny, where they are planning to binge on the delights of wine, food and flesh. 2 of the songs are in English, and since neither Brecht nor Weill spoke much English at the time, it's probably safe to assume that these were written by Hauptmann. And here America is held up not only as the birthplace of jazz, but as the epitome of rampant greed is good capitalism. But what happens in the piece also reflects what the artists had seen happening in their own society. The influx of agrarian workers into German cities ward out labourers hoping to take advantage of opportunities in the urban centres and improve their lot after the collapse of the feudal system. In the Songspiel, after the initial excitement and debauchery, the men soon realise that in order to continue to feast on the pleasures that the city offers, they need an inexhaustible supply of money. Otherwise, like the women that they use, they too will quickly become exploited and trapped, part of the soulless machine, as in Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which was made in the same year as the Songspiel. Ultimately, for the men and women of Mahagonny, there is no way out of their vicious cycle, but as they themselves say, they aren't to blame for their vice, because it's the system that determines their choices.
I'm joined again by Isabelle and Julia, as well as Lizzie Clachan, I hope I've said that as beautifully as you said it, who is the designer for this piece. Isabelle, I'm going to start off with you. Tell us about how you approached the narrative for these pieces. These something you said actually in your introduction really resonated with me, that they're really radical pieces of work, and that felt really, as a starting point, that's what I love about them, and it felt important just kind of honouring that. But also really, it really started with conversations with Lizzie about, not that long ago, because we only got the green light for this project about maybe 2 months ago. So Lizzie, Julia and I have been having various conversations. But as Lizzie and I talked, we really, the feeling that I have always had is that it had to be contemporary. That felt like the first thing. Brecht wrote it as a critique of capitalism, and it's a story of 2 women, well, really 1 woman, but sort of different ways that women get kind of treated in a capitalist society. But also, I think what really resonated about that in today's world is the sort of double standards placed on women, but also the new pressures that they have to kind of present themselves in different ways, and all the different camera lenses that are on them all the time. So it just felt like if you're doing a critique of capitalist society, which that piece was at the time, it feels like we've got to see the ways that that critique can apply now, because the sad truth is that actually the story feels, terrifyingly relevant, actually, that we're seeing women really struggle with the double standard, struggle with the idea of really the dreams that they've been sold, the idea of kind of always pursuing something better, looking better, being better, earning more money, always being pushed to do that, but also what we see in the story is really the cost on them. So that, and that's something I feel has been in also the kind of, maybe it's just been because I've seen so much media around it, around celebrity women, that we've seen so many stories recently of the gap between their self that is presented online
versus what they are actually dealing with. But also I think in women I know, and so many people we know, that this idea of kind of that the more we post on Instagram, the more we have a social media presence, the more we live out our lives there, the more we might actually start, not always, but often it has quite a big cost internally, and that felt really, I mean, it just felt such a natural fit for this piece, which is really exploring the two kind of the sort of split in personality that happens when you try and pursue success in a capitalist society. And then we're sort of approaching Mahagonny Songspiel, and we're kind of, I mean, in a way, it is similar in some ways, but I don't think it is as simple as saying it's a critique of contemporary capitalism. The way I started to see it was actually that if Seven Deadly Sins is a kind of crisis of femininity, then Mahagonny Songspiel is a crisis of masculinity. Because it's about these guys who go off to this fantasy place where they think, you know, they want to just have everything they want. They want women, whiskey, they want to gamble, they want to get really drunk and have no consequences for their actions. But what we discover and they discover is they're actually escaping feelings of shame and guilt and despair. And it feels like, yeah, it just suddenly felt like that really made sense of the two pieces, and it felt like applying it to today and the issues we see today just felt very, very natural.
For you, what were the key themes? You know, what were the characteristics you thought, I have to pull these out? I
think, I mean, to me, it's really that the gap between the internal self and the external self. It feels really important, I think, in kind of my own experiences with mental health, but also with so many people I know, kind of what I was talking about, really, this sort of, and because we live in such a presentational society, and especially in the last year, you know, we're living out our life actually through different screens, through cameras. So that just felt like finding what that is, the kind of who is the real person and what do they really want versus what is kind of society expecting of them, and how does our particular society today actually increase those pressures or change, kind of make it much harder for them to live out what they really might want. So that kind of felt interesting to me, as well as actually what we've kind of tried to do is complicate the narrative in thinking that even as Anna 2 becomes increasingly successful, that there is a part of her that harnesses that power. Although in some ways her image is just being consumed and she becomes a product in some ways, but they're also seeing the ways that women, the kind of constant paradox that women face in society who might be becoming successful, that they can harness power, they have power, but also they're still completely reliant on image and presentation. And they might have all sorts of things going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. So that just felt really important. And then, yeah, in Mahagonny, it feels like we see the men, the same singers will be in Seven Deadly Sins, and we just see them be not particularly nice, and the voices of society sort of that the women internalize, but then it felt important to give them a chance to actually go on their journey of discovering what their relationship is to the pursuit of pleasure, freedom, success.
I mean, really powerful, really resonant themes. Lizzie, for you, how do you turn these into a set? Tell us about your designs.
Well, I mean, Isabelle's talked a lot about the sort of divided self, and I suppose that was a really kind of good and clear way to think about the design. And, you know, so for us, for Seven Deadly Sins, the stage is literally divided into two, and these sort of dualities, which we explore all the way through the piece, can be explored sort of spatially. So we have in that space, we have a sort of off-stage space, which is identified by a dressing room, and then a sort of on-stage space, which can become any number of studio or performance spaces, which the two Annas inhabit. And, you know, and I think this kind of is a sort of a metaphor as well for all the things that Isabelle was talking about the way we present ourselves and the people we are behind the presentation. And so we can explore that spatially. So the dressing room space, the backstage space, has many, many mirrors, and so there's a lot of opportunity for reflection. But then the whole space itself sort of acts as a large mirror, and so that the two Annas often mirror each other, and we see them sometimes do the same thing, and we also see how their journey begins to sort of fragment and become separate. So that's the sort of main juxt of how the design works. And then to sort of to bring in the Brechtian element, because we are talking about Brecht, and we wanted to work with the Brechtian sort of aesthetic. We wanted to show the sort of machinations of the theatre. So we've decided to sort of turn the stage around. And so rather than be in the auditorium and look onto the stage, we are on the stage looking out. And so we can see all the wonderful workings of the space, as well as this sort of beauty of the front of house of the auditorium. So spatially, in this kind of larger way, we also explore these levels of presentation of the self and in architecture as well. And in our world, this kind of auditorium of gold and red becomes a rather sort of fantastical, maybe unreachable sort of goal for Anna. And then when we go into Mahagonny Songspiel, then we sort of push further into that auditorium. And we push into the sort of fantasy and the sort of fantastical nature of a space which is not being inhabited in the way that it normally is. So, you know, as the designer of the piece, I'm taking into consideration the time that we're making this piece, you know, a time during the COVID where the opera house is shut and there is no live audience. Something is being live streamed. It's a very fragile mix between, it's not a film and it's not a live performance, it's something in between. And so the design and the production really needs to sort of, you know, play with that idea. So we find ourselves in an auditorium which is now possibly has become a stage for us. And it just changes the way in which we can understand the theatre. We can see the theatre and the auditorium in a way which we've never seen it before. And these are all very sort of exciting ways of playing with the opportunity as well as the challenges of making work at a time like this.
I have to say, I love the sound of the Brechtian aesthetic. It's a beautiful phrase. Julia, for you, is that one of the themes you were bringing into your choreography?
Kind of. I think it really kind of derived from our first conversation, mine and Izzie's conversation, where she was getting an understanding of where my influences have come from. They come from the hip-hop scene, as well as contemporary dance and theatre world, and physical theatre. So when I knew that this was the work that we were exploring, we had a clear discussion about, what sort of language that it would really explore. And yeah, Brechtian language, or that kind of gestural language, or the subtleties of things, because also we had to think about it being on film. So that also changed the way we were thinking about how do we minimize and how do we really expand everything as well, as if it was a live show where you really have to stretch everything as well. So yeah, it's different. It definitely has a different aspect of how we approach what the movement and the qualities of textures are to explain the feelings and the nuances. There's so much subtext in little things that you can just say it for a gesture or a look, so those little things are quite, Izzie's really great at that as well, in terms of directing those little things which are quite subtle. So,
I mean, speaking of the little things, we saw a little bit of your work with Jonadette and Thomasin. So tell me, why them? What do they bring to this?
I mean, there was a few things that were really most important. One was that their presence as artists is really strong, that they had different types of disciplines, and they both have different disciplines, and that they could potentially act as well, because a lot of it was a different style of presentation, and we wanted that flexibility. So with Jonadette, I know her from the hip-hop scene and from the battle scene and competition world, and she specialises in popping and crump, but she's been in massive film, she's done so many different things. So I know that she can be really experimental, and she can be a sponge in the way she learns, and then be really creative and contribute to the process, because that's very much how we work. We work quite collaboratively, and Izzie gives us all the space to input our ideas into it. And so I know that Jonadette's like that as an artist and how she works. And then in terms of Thomasin, he's got so much experience in contemporary dance, so much different vocabulary. I've always wanted to work with him for a long time, and he works within martial arts, capoeira, and studies the internal arts, and that merged with the qualities of what Jonadette has, they can really make a nice mixture of what you'll see at the show, you know. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty amazing to work with these two artists. I've got to say, I feel quite spoiled.
Isabelle, one quick question for you. Is there a learning that you'll take forward from creating a work in such difficult and challenging circumstances?
Yeah, there are so many learnings. There are so many learnings. I mean, I think one of the things that has really excited me about it actually is that, you know, you get presented with sort of a very, very long list of all the things you can't do, but it actually then makes you realise kind of what creativity is actually always possible, no matter how many restrictions you have. You know, we have staged the whole thing, everyone is 2 meters apart, no one can ever touch the same costumes, no one can ever touch each other. And so, you know, and at first you think, oh God, you know, how are you going to be able to create something like that? But actually, and also, I mean, Lizzie and I have been, sort of the design has come out of not having a set build at all. So actually it just shows you that sometimes those obstacles just lead you to make something that you probably would never have thought of if you hadn't had the obstacle in the first place. So I think it's just great to know that whatever challenge gets thrown up, then everyone will rally around and we'll figure it out, and actually you can still get some really, really beautiful work nonetheless.
Lizzie, is that the same for you? Do you feel those are the kind of learnings you'll be taking forward?
I mean, I actually, as a designer, I love parameters and I love obstacles, because I think that, you know, it's through obstacle and challenge that you can really set creativity free. And I really feel that the kind of obstacles in this scenario really made us interrogate our material. You know, such interrogation, and therefore like a real confidence, I think, in the material that we're working with and the way we want to do it. You know, of course, you know, it's very challenging, and you wouldn't want to work with obstacles all the time. But as a sort of like think about process and really sort of having a go, you know, in this time I've enjoyed the obstacles actually. It's been very sort of good for the artistic soul.
That's fantastic to hear. It does sound like it's been an incredibly enjoyable challenge. So thank you so much for speaking to me, Julia, Isabelle, Lizzie. Well, to take us into the musical world of Kurt Weill, please welcome conductor Michael Papadopoulos, mezzo-soprano Stephanie Wake-Edwards, and on the piano, Michael Sikich.
Hello, my name is Michael Papadopoulos. I am lucky enough to be conducting this incredible double bill of works by Kurt Weill and Bert Brecht. I am delighted to be joined once again by my young artist colleagues Steph Wake-Edwards and Michael Sikich on the piano. We heard a little excerpt from the Seven Deadly Sins earlier. We're going to go back to that now actually and look a little bit at the prologue, which is the very beginning of the piece, the first music we'll hear. And I think the prologue is a really nice sort of window into this style for various reasons. Firstly, we get introduced to the characters Anna 1 and Anna 2. Anna 1 is a sort of pragmatist. She is an ambitious manipulator, and very coincidentally is played by a singer. Anna 2 is more of a dreamer. She's the dancer, and she gets upset and angered by manipulation, injustice. So is really the polar opposite. But as Anna 1 says in the prologue, they are basically two sides of the same coin. The other reason this is a really great introduction to the music is because we really get an insight into the musical language with which Weill tells this incredible story. And we'll talk a little bit about that now. The first thing to say actually is that originally this music was written for quite a large orchestra, maybe 50, 60 players. But the arrangement we're doing now was actually written in 2019 by Gruber and Mutspiel. And it reduces this enormous, lush orchestration down to only 15 players. And apart from being an incredible feat of arranging, that's also creates quite a wonderful opportunity for us to find a slightly more small-scale, chamber, intimate interpretation of this music. The music of Weill is never far away from cabaret. In fact, it's heavily inspired by cabaret. So the fact that we've only got these 15 players really allows us, and I think we've had lots of fun in the rehearsal room playing with this idea of finding quite subtle colours and playing a lot with the rubato, and I think actually having the fewer players makes that more possible than if we had the enormous band. We're just going to look a little bit at the very opening. We start with this orchestral introduction before Steph comes in with her singing. And we're just going to play that for you first, and then we'll go back and talk about a little few details. So here's the very beginning of the evening. Lovely, well done, great. So what an amazing introduction. It's got so many little bits of detail in. I'm just going to talk about a little few things that really capture my imagination. The first thing to notice is that we have this quite sort of repetitive accompaniment. Jam, ja, dum, dum, bum, dum, ba, dum, bum. In this arrangement, we've got the pizzicato strings, and probably my favorite instrument in the whole evening, the banjo, strumming away, giving us this sort of American twang to this opening. And what this does is it creates this incredible sense of tread. The two Anna sisters are embarking on a 7-year journey through 7 different cities in the States in order to make a fortune which they can then send back to their family back home in Louisiana. And I said before, Anna 1 is this really steadfast, determined character, and there's a real determination in this music, not only in the accompaniment, which is quite sort of relentless in spirit, but also in this melody which has these dotted figures which really give a sense of purpose, which we're always trying to bring out. Another little interesting feature, I said that the two Anna sisters are the same character, but they're also different characters, and I think Weill gives us a very sort of subtle but actually quite clever portrayal of these two characters in the opening. If we just play from the very beginning, and I'll just highlight this little moment where it happens. So the beginning is... Notice the tread in the accompaniment. And these dotted figures give a sense of purpose. Now we have a beautiful legato line. Now Anna 2. So if we listen to that, we have this beautiful expansive line. Great. So we have this dum ba da la dum ba 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 bum bum, and I always think in this piece, the quite sharp dotted figures represent Anna 1, and the more expansive romantic gestures represent Anna 2. So that's a lovely little detail I think that Weill has deliberately put in just to give the sense of the fact that there are these two sisters who are different and yet the same. The harmony in this is always unsettled. We start on this B flat and G in the clarinets, which sounds like this, and it just sort of floats, and that first chord there, it's the A major with the 7th in the bass. It just sounds like this. It's not resolved. It's sort of yearning for something and yet never achieving it. I am quickly running out of time, so I'm just going to rush forward a little bit to where Steph comes in so she can actually demonstrate some of her beautiful singing for us. So if we just go from 2 bars before Steph comes in, and we'll just show a little bit of this.
Meine Schwester und ich stammen aus Louisiana, wo die Wasser des Mississippi und Bohne fließen, wie sie aus den Lieden erfahren können. Dorthin wollen wir zurückkehren, lieber heute als morgen.
Lovely, beautiful. Notice what Steph's doing with this text. Actually, when you look at it on the page, it's written in quite a square way. Meine Schwester und ich stammen aus Louisiana. Wo die Wasser des Mississippi unter den Monden fließen. And we could deliver it in quite a square style, but I think what that loses is this sort of improvisatory character that we get from this sort of cabaret influence. I'm just going to ask Steph very quickly just to demonstrate the very boring square version of this, which goes against all of her natural instincts, obviously. And then we'll just compare and just find a little bit more freedom. And that's the sort of thing we've been working on throughout this piece, just to give that sense. So here's the bar you come in.
Meine Schwester und ich stammen aus Louisiana, wo die Wasser des Mississippi unter Monde fließen.
Great, that's enough of that. So that gives us a really sort of strong, and I can see Michael sort of flinching on the piano. But that's what it is on the page. And our job in the rehearsal room has been to find a more cultivated version where we're playing with rubato. And rubato comes from the Italian rubare, which means to steal. So we're literally stealing time. Meine Schwester und ich stammen aus Louisiana. And this is just a little example of this, but this actually permeates through the entire piece. And we're just going to give Steph a chance to give us the proper version before we move on. So here's one more time, the bar we come in, and...
Meine Schwester und ich stammen aus Louisiana, wo die Wasser des Mississippi unter Monde fließen, wie sie aus den Liedern erfahren können. Dorthin wollen wir zurückkehren, lieber heute als morgen.
Lovely, yeah, great, that's what it should be. Great, so that's a little bit of an insight into the sort of musical style and the way Weill writes for the voice and how we're deciding to interpret it in this very sort of free, improvised cabaret style, which I think works really well, especially with the reduced orchestration we're doing. So thank you so much to Steph. We're going to turn now a little bit to the second half of our double bill, Mahagonny Songspiel. Now this is the same composer-librettist combination, Brecht and Weill, and yet the music seems to be from a different place entirely. This was composed in 1927. Actually, Weill was commissioned by a chamber music festival in Baden-Baden in Germany to write a sort of small-scale opera, and he used this as an opportunity to sort of experiment with what opera could be with his new librettist, Bertolt Brecht, whom he'd only met earlier that year. And there's a real sense in this piece of two utter geniuses working out what this art form was. And in the best possible way, this sense of experimentation is so potent in this piece. I think it's only 25 minutes long, and yet there's so much wild, eccentric variety contained within it. It's almost unbelievable. It kind of goes by in a flash. But we've had all sorts of sort of styles, textures, instrumentation, languages even. We're going to start by looking a little bit at the very beginning of this piece. And again, the start of this piece is a journey, like it was in Seven Deadly Sins. But this time, the journey is to Mahagonny, this sort of fabled place where these four men, the protagonists in this piece, can have keine Direktion, no sort of bureaucracy, no management. There's a sense of going somewhere where there are no rules. They can be as wild and crazy as they like. In fact, one of the characters says, we're looking forward to going there so we can have Pferd und Weiberfleisch, literally horse and woman meat. So we're talking about quite vulgar stuff here. And Weill does a really incredible job of capturing the sort of grit of this in his music. We're just going to play a little bit from the very opening, just to give you a sense of this. Great, what an incredible beginning. I mean, the Seven Deadly Sins opening was wonderful in its own way. this is just an explosion of sort of riotous joy. There are a few similarities. I mean, we've got the dotted figure, yum, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. Again, this sort of sense of determination. We've got this sort of cha in the sort of accompaniment in the piano, in the trombone, and in the percussion. But when we when we think of this sort of cha accompaniment, we usually associate it with a sort of triadic version. If I get Michael just to play what the sort of traditional version of this accompaniment might be, it might sound something like this. Great, so on the cha chords, the cha, we have, in that case, just a simple C major triad, which is quite sort of familiar to us. I'm just going to ask Michael to very slowly spread what the cha chord is here, and it sounds something quite different. Great, so that's not a triad at all. It's almost a sort of cluster chord where sort of several adjacent notes are sort of put together, and it sounds quite scrunchy. So if Michael just plays the left hand, just to give us a sense of the sort of cacophony of joy. Lovely. So it's this incredible sort of energy and grit in the sound. On top of that, we've got this wild yum ba-dum 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 bum 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 ba-dum 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 ba-dum. Again, riotous sort of anarchy. We've got clarinets trilling wildly. I should actually talk very quickly about the orchestration in this piece. While Seven Deadly Sins is a reduction of quite a large orchestral score, this is actually written for quite modest forces anyway. We've got 2 violins, 2 clarinets, 2 trumpets, a saxophone, trombone, and all sorts of percussion and a piano. So it's a real sort of gutsy sound that we've got here. The structure of this piece is actually that we have 3 Mahagonny songs, which are in German, and they're sung by the men. In between these Mahagonny songs, we've got 2 songs in English. We've got the Alabama song and the Benares song, which are sung by the 2 female protagonists, Jessie and Bessie. In between those as well, we have these extraordinary orchestral interludes, which we'll get to in a second. But first, I'd just like to look at the second of the ladies' music, the Benares song. At this point in the narrative, the men are on they've arrived in Mahagonny and they're having a great time, except by now they're sort of beginning to realize that Mahagonny is not necessarily all that it was cracked up to be. And Weill creates this incredible atmosphere in this piece where we just feel the utter despondency of these men. They've arrived somewhere they thought it was going to be life-changing, and actually it's no different to the place they left. So we're just going to give a little bit of a lead-in from the previous orchestral interlude, just from the bar before figure C. Notice this repeating figure just sort of winds down, sort of losing its road a little bit. And then we sort of reach this stillness, and then this new texture as the saxophone. There is no whiskey in this town. There is no bar to sit us down. Then the men let out a cry. Oh, where is the telephone? Another cry from the men. Oh, is here no telephone? Great, so the first change obviously is that this is in English, and it's not only in English, it's in a quite sort of deliberately stilted English. They're completely despondent. There is no whiskey in this town. There is no bar to sit us down. The men let out this really sort of grief-stricken cry of "oh," and they just sort of dissolve away into nothingness. We have the saxophone doing this really sort of yearnful wow, wow, You can sort of smell the cigarette smoke in this one, and it's such an evocative image of despair, which is so brilliantly portrayed by Weill. We're slightly running out of time, so the one last thing I'd like to show is, I think, my favourite moment in the entire double bill, and it just sort of comes out of nowhere. It's actually at the end of this Benares song. We sort of wind down into nothingness, and then from this nothingness comes this quasi sort of avant-garde expression from the orchestra. It's marked as a chorale. It's almost sort of ecclesiastical somehow. It's like the sort of the organ building to the most sublime moment during Mass. And then it dissolves, and again we go into the sort of final Mahagonny song. So I just want to give we've sort of had the caricature of masculinity at the opening. We've had the sort of smoky cabaret room of Benares. And then we have this. Let's go straight on it. Figure K is just the bar before is 1, 2. There's just 2 clarinets. We start to build a little bit. A little bit more insistent. And then crescendo. Tension there. And then we go for it. Insistent, and it winds down now, and then back to the clarinet, this sort of yearning motif which repeats and just loses energy every time, and last time with an echo, and then it's repeated in the trumpet. And isn't that the most extraordinary music you've ever heard, especially in the context of everything we've heard so far? Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you on the 9th of April. Thank you very much.
Well, I am now joined by Stephanie. I have to say, it's been so enjoyable to listen to you this evening. Thrilled to have you here. Got a big list of questions that I'm very excited to ask. So to start off with, of course, you play Anna 1 in Seven Deadly Sins and Jessie in Mahagonny. So how have you approached these roles?
So we weren't sure whether this was going to happen. So we're very lucky that it has ended up happening. And so this has kind of been a year in the making for me. I found out about this time last year that I was going to be doing both these roles. So she's been on the burner, and we worked extensively on the German pronunciation in the first lockdown on Zoom as a group. And then we've kind of been dipping in and out of the German with Zoom classes, but it's only really been in the last 2 months that we've known that it's definitely going to happen. So we've been looking a lot at the different characters. And when I first looked at Anna 1, I thought she was a certain kind of person. And I thought that actually she was quite nasty. And the way Izzy is now looking at the character and the theme that we're going with is there's much more of like a degeneration of herself throughout the piece. This is Anna 1 I'm talking about. And I did a sociology degree, and the first thing I thought when they were talking about the on-stage, off-stage aspect of the character of Anna 1, it was Irving Goffman's theory of on-stage, off-stage in how we perform in real life. So how our on-stage personas are how we've been socially conditioned to behave when we're with people, and the constraints of society. So every time, so that Anna 2, if you like, is the kind of on-stage persona of Anna 1. And then Anna 1 is allowed to be her off-stage version of herself, and it's what you're like behind closed doors, you know, when you know no one's looking at you, you can pick your nose, and you can swear and do whatever you want because we're not under those constraints. But we're using social media as an example of on-stage, so I use the phone as a device and a laptop as a device to show when I'm switched on. So as soon as that comes out, I'm suddenly on stage, and we see how the social media and how performing and having to perform your whole life leads to her downfall and her demise, really. So she's a much more vulnerable character than I first thought. And then similarly, Jessie, that whole Mahagonny world is much less naturalistic. So all the acting that we're doing is much more stylized and choreographed, and we're kind of like the projections of what the men want to see. So it's almost like we're performing for them, but with a self-awareness, and that's in a very, very interesting contrast to Anna, because it's like a much more human character that is much more vulnerable. So yeah, that's how I prepared for them.
I mean, it's a big task. And of course, Anna is something of a split role, making it, you know, that little bit more complicated than something that, you know, just relies on your interpretation.
Exactly.
So how have you found building that connection with Jonadette, who is, of course, Anna too?
So it's really interesting working with a dancer because, I mean, we do quite a lot of movement in opera, and I've had to do a reasonable amount of movement. But when you see someone who's really good at dancing, and then we're having to do some mirroring work, I'm suddenly aware of how unfluid I am compared to her. But it's nice to have, because I'm not really thinking of her that she's myself. It's very much I'm thinking that she's a different character, and I think I'm jealous of her because she's the on-stage personality that I'm kind of forcing her to be, but also so desperately want to be, but can't be, because it's difficult to be switched on all the time and to be this like caricature of yourself. So working with Jonadette has really helped me develop the character, and having someone to bounce off of. It's really, if I was just singing at myself in the mirror the whole time, it would be really hard to react to my own face. So, I mean, and it has been difficult because we're all wearing masks the whole time. But so it makes you realize how important eyes are and how much you can say through just the intensity of one's gaze. So yeah, it's been really special working with a dancer, because I don't think I've ever done that actually when it's just been me and a non-singer on stage.
Well, speaking of your career, you're part of the Jette Parker Young Artists Programme. So tell us a little bit more about what that is and what it's meant for you.
So the Jette Parker Young Artists Programme, I would say, is kind of like a really nice apprenticeship where you have to audition and you are given a contract and you have a million opportunities to do main stage roles and covers, and you have amazing coaching and teachers and people come in and massage you and help you sing better and look better. We have like personal training, we have everything. Not that you would think it, but we do. And it's just been the best start I can possibly think of for having a professional career, because you're in a safe space and you are mentored and you meet people that you never thought you would have met, and you work with people that you never thought you would be able to work with. So I just feel very lucky that this has happened. And in as much as I only really had 6 months of my contract, because then we had a pandemic. Don't know if you heard about that. But in some ways, this would never have happened. You know, we would never be doing this on the main stage in the capacity that we are doing it, with the film element as well, which is very interesting. And we've done so many filming projects, and I know all these camera people very well because we've done so many streamed events, and it just has really taught, I think, all of us how to sing with microphones and communicate with a camera and get used to having a camera on you, because it's very alien as an opera singer, because we're so used to just using our voices to project into a theatre. So it's taught me all these brand new skills and given me all these new opportunities, which wouldn't necessarily have happened. Not that the pandemic is a good thing, still happening.
Definitely not, but I mean, that does sound absolutely incredible. I have to say, I'm a little bit jealous, and not just because of the massages. Stephanie, thank you very much. Well, I am so sad to say that that is all we have time for. Thank you to all of my fantastic guests this evening. And don't forget that you can watch this live on the 9th of April. So check out the Royal Opera House website to find out more information. But all that's left to say is a huge thank you to Oak Foundation for supporting the Jette Parker Young Artists programme. And of course, a huge thank you to you at home for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this evening's insight, supported by Rolex. Good night.